7:33 coming up towards 7:34 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, the traffic TT camera appears to be out of focus. Okay, it's just sorted itself out, and we can have a look at the traffic along the Western Main Road in St. James, moving along nicely on this bright and warm morning. Actually, it's warmer in London than it is in Trinidad and Tobago today, because there's a heat wave passing through Europe, the second for this early part of summer. They're expecting temperatures reaching as high as 38, 39 degrees Celsius in the UK and 42 in continental Europe, including France and so on. So the heat is on there, and here in Trinidad and Tobago we're dealing with other types of issues where the heat would be on as well. But let's shift our focus a little bit as we head into the final hour, half an hour of our show this morning, because the Islamic Resource Society, they're having a special lecture that's happening tomorrow from 7 p.m. in commemoration of Emancipation Day. It's their 24th annual lecture. Commemorates 185 years of emancipation. Kwesi Atiba, who is a long-standing member of that organization, it was actually the trigger for my column this week in the Express, because of his assertion about exceptional West Indies cricket teams and Trinidad and Tobago netball teams from an earlier era. But he's here to talk with us, and hopefully will be joined in a few minutes by the featured speaker at tomorrow's event. That's Rebecca Masterton, who's a British Islamic scholar and an educator, a public speaker and an academic as well. So lots of different qualities to Miss Masterton. Hopefully she'll be joining us before we end this segment. Kwesi, good to see you once again. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam to you, and peace be upon the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, we don't have time to go into the sport thing about the netball and the cricket.
Nobody give me an editorial that people start asking me about this week. You know, I see your name, Fazeer, put your name first.
But I'm glad people are actually reading it. But anyway, let's talk about what the reason why you're here. Yeah. The event that's happening tomorrow. Tell us about it.
Yes. Well, for the past 24 years, the Islamic Resource Society has been doing a lecture. Every year we have done a lecture to commemorate emancipation, the whole emancipation issue, because it's a very important issue for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we decided years ago that it was important that people get an understanding of emancipation, especially from an Islamic perspective. You know,
because people don't always make that connection.
No.
Emancipation and Islam, what they have to do with each other.
Right, and many times people do not recognize that the Muslims were here since the time of slavery.
In other words, before the Fatal Razak turned up,
yes,
in 1845, Muslims were here.
Muslims were here. In the Americas, the whole Western continents, Muslims have been here. And this is something that is not very well known. And it's important that we know that, and it's important also that Muslims recognize and participate in the events of emancipation, you know, and we have had emancipation issues all over the Western Hemisphere, but Trinidad and Tobago seems to have had the most pronounced one. In the United States of America, what is interesting is that the Declaration of Emancipation was read on the 1st of January 1863, and people maybe didn't take that on too much. However, the slaves in Texas didn't recognize, or they didn't know that they were emancipated until June the 19th, 1865. So they were slaves for 2.5 years.
When they should not have been.
When they should not have been. So they have something they call Juneteenth in the United States. And many people, I've met a number of Americans who have come to Trinidad and Tobago, and when they see what happens here for emancipation, they say, wow, we should be doing that back home. So they have started to develop their Juneteenth holiday, you know. But our issue is always an educational issue.
And that's the thing, Kwesi, and the importance of a lecture in that sense. And by the way, the theme, the topic that Ms. Masterton will be focusing on, secularism, the modern method of enslavement. It's nice, and I'm sure it's good to know people are impressed by the observance of it, the outward observance of it, but the internalization, the education, the enlightenment, where are we at with that from your point of view?
Well, I think people are slow on the pickup with respect to that, because, you know, for many years in Trinidad and Tobago, they had this thing called Discovery Day on the 1st of August.
Correct.
Or somewhere around the 1st of August. I think it was actually the first Monday. It was actually the first Monday in August.
Was it the 1st of August was always Discovery Day?
First Monday in August.
Okay, all right.
It was the first Monday in August. In fact, that was a second carnival. But that is what had been put in place, because Emancipation Day was recognized many, many years ago before that.
Sure.
But then the British, for their own reasons, pushed towards this question of Discovery Day, which lasted for a while until people challenged it, and it was replaced by Emancipation Day. In Maru, I think they still have some marking of Discovery Day.
Yeah.
But the whole situation now has moved to Emancipation Day, and what emancipation means, how we should be moving forward. My position basically is that in the West, the peoples of the West and the people who were brought to the West have been caught up in a Euro-American dynamic, a narrative, which isn't doing us too well. You know, we go into their fancy politics and their courts, a two-party system, people want to say is here from time immemorial. Time immemorial is 200 years ago, you know. And we need to know, you know, who we are as people, you know, what we have had, how we have structured our societies in the past, and how we can structure them in the future to get the best out of life, because that is what it is about. Emancipation is about human beings living a full life, you know, doing what is best for them.
And while we're giving you this information, let's tell you and remind you that the event is happening tomorrow from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. It's going to be at Nallis. I didn't mention that at the top. It's going to be at Nallis at the corner of Hart and Abercrombie Street right here in downtown Port-of-Spain. You are asked to be seated by 6:45 because they want to start on time. It features the feature speaker, of course, Rebecca Masterton, who is a British Islamic scholar, and the theme, Secularism, the Modern Method of Enslavement. And it's to the 24th annual lecture to commemorate emancipation this year, marking 185 years since the Emancipation Proclamation. And the theme is self-explanatory. Would suggest that we could be getting some very interesting information coming from Ms. Masterton.
Yes, we do hope so, because you know, some people may not understand the question of being in a lockdown from a system, you know, and you live it and you function and you think, hey, this is great. Many people are not benefiting from just living a good lifestyle, trying to be a good person, trying to go forward, trying to take your children forward, you know.
But you know, Kwesi, because, and again, this might be just plain old ignorance, this might just be because of stereotypes, this might be because of prejudices, or just people have their own ideas about things. They might say, well, if this system is so great, what I must do? Go and do like what is doing in Africa, shooting one another, coups every 5 minutes, people, you know, doing all sorts of things which are seen to be barbaric in some ways. You want me to go to that? They might be asking the question.
Yeah, that's a fair question. That's a fair question. But what we need to also understand is that the same system has dominated the world for about the last 500 years. You know, when they tell us about, you know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, that United States stuff, you know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and we have had our own Columbus issues here, and people are now looking at that as an, you know, a question of how do we treat with this Columbus issue. Columbus discovered a place where there were people, you know, and a system has been imposed, you know. I was hearing somebody was saying last year about, you know, how people are treating with the peoples of Europe and that kind of thing. So the peoples of Europe have slaughtered all kinds of people in this, in the non-European world. Africa, India, North America, South America, and they have put their system on people. And, you know, if you argue too much, you know, they slaughter you. And it goes on today. If you disagree with some of the things that they say, they're ready to bomb you, they're ready to, you know, terrorize you. So we have had to function with that. There's a particular kind of governance that exists in the world today, and people say, well, you know, two-party system, three-party system, you know, democracy, whatever that means.
Could I ask you to pause question, because the guest is here, Ms. Masterton, who was running a bit late this morning. She is in the building as we understand it, and should be joining us in a matter of minutes. So let's take a break and see if we could squeeze in a few minutes with our featured speaker from tomorrow's event. We'll be right back. You caught me on air while I'm having the discussion with the guest, because I was so busy in the discussion. Well, but we have a few minutes left with our guests. Our guests this morning, because we have Kwesi Atiba of the Islamic Resource Society. We're talking about the event that's coming up tomorrow at Nalis from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. and a bit late for different because of traffic situation. But in the few minutes that we have left with Rebecca Masterton, who's going to be the feature speaker at the event tomorrow, the modern method of enslavement, which is secularism, the modern method of enslavement. Ms. Masterton, her first time in Trinidad and Tobago. She is from London, doesn't support any of the football teams in London, which I find a little interesting, but anyway, that's another matter. But she accepted Islam 20 years ago and is going to be speaking tomorrow. Good to have you with us this morning. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks very much for joining us. What can people look forward to with your contribution tomorrow?
Inshallah, I'm going to be talking about, as we said, secularism, because I grew up in a secular environment and found that actually, as human beings, we have a soul, we have an inner reality, and a secular society does not support the cultivation of esoteric knowledge, of a knowledge of the self, of a knowledge of realms that lie beyond this one. Very early on, before I converted to Islam, I took an interest in cultures that have been colonized, because as I grew up, I realized that the same struggles that I had with my own culture, other people who have been colonized by that culture have also had those struggles. And in exploring other cultures as well, I studied Islamic literature of West Africa. In studying other cultures and other literatures, I was able to relate to the points of view of people from those cultures, particularly with regard to how we envision reality. This has always been like one of my main themes, that the colonization is not just a physical colonization, it's an existential colonization, a mental, psychological, spiritual colonization. And with colonialism, particularly, I did my doctorate in a book by a Senegalese writer called Cheikh Hamidou Kane. It's called Ambiguous Adventure, and I can recommend it to everybody because it's quite a short book, but it encapsulates the struggle within the self of a young Muslim boy from Senegal who is forced to leave his sheikh, leave his teacher, and attend the French school and become a, secularized, nominal Frenchman. And actually what it does is to cut himself off from his inner connection to himself.
It's really a pity, unfortunately, that time doesn't allow us to really get more into it. But before we get a final word from Kwesi, of course, what is happening now in the politics of the UK? You might not be interested in football, but certainly the politics and what is happening there. Just a very quick comment as to what this all means, the Brexit thing, Boris Johnson now as Prime Minister and so on. Is there cause for concern for the Muslim community in the UK?
I mean, there is a growing far right in the UK. There have been issues, obviously, with certain, with the UK sponsoring Salafism in the UK, and of course, Salafism causing problems. So that has given rise partly to a rise in the far right. But of course, Boris Johnson is partly Turkish, so we have a Turkish Prime Minister now. And we should be very proud of that.
Well, that should make for an interesting part of the discussion come tomorrow. So that's coming up tomorrow. So again, Kwesi, we want to remind everybody the event starts at 7 o'clock?
At 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. To 9 p.m. at the Nalis, which is at, Nalis puts the address as Hart and Abercrombie, but most people know it as Queen and Abercrombie.
Yes.
So don't get confused over that. We just reproduce what they gave us. But however, those who have been to the IRS lectures before for Emancipation know, we always come with something positive. And of course, there's always the question and answers after the exercise. So, we hope that as many people as possible would be there to hear what we think is going to be a very enlightening lecture, because it departs a little bit from the slave and slave master in the past, but to something that continues.
And don't ask him anything about Trinidad and Tobago netball or were talking about last week, and I happened to put in the papers on Monday. But just in concluding this segment, I want to thank for being with us once again. Let's tell you as well that it's time now for our proudly TNT segment, brought to you by the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association.